In this session, we will do some deep dive into Advanced Studio on how we can use some of these components that we discussed in our earlier session. So, in order to create studio integration like we discussed earlier, so let's create one new studio integration. So I will log into studio, we'll go to file, we'll go to new and Workday assembly project. So here we give my project name and I'll click on next and I'll click on finish. So my project gets created. Now for any studio integration, the first component that should be available is the Workday in component. This is a mandatory step. So what I would do, I would simply drag this Workday in component into my workspace and I will start setting the properties of this component. So in the ID, I'll keep the name as start here. In the advanced, I'll keep the integration system name as same. I don't want to change it. And launch parameters, let me add one or two launch parameters. Like, for example, let's say I will add a name, for example, and the type, I will add it as a text. Okay, this will be my launch parameter. And I'll go to service and we'll add a few services here. One, I will add the attribute service. I will create, and once you add, you got these two different tabs. So I'm going to add few attributes here. So let me add the attribute called, say, for example, and the type can be text. And let me add one reference type. So reference type, let's say I will add, for example, let's search for a few things. Once I click on this white arrow, this window pops up wherein you can search for a single value, you can search for a multi-value, you can search for both. Here, let's say I'll search for manager, for example. You got manager level 1. So let me click on finish. And here I will give a name. It's supervisor. This is my attribute name. Okay. So these are the two attributes that I have added. And I will add few integration maps. So for example, I will add gender, internal type as text, external type as text, or I can also select the type here and change it to different type. If you click on this drop down, you will be able to select the class report field so that when you browse for it, you will be able to search for any existing field involved. So I will select the gender. If I want to select the sample, see the sample values, I can click on next. This looks good. So I'll say finish. Now in my UI, this will be a drop down and this will be a text. So now I have added attributes, I have added maps, and let me save. Okay. Now let's try to add retrieval service. We'll try to add a report service. I will say u underscore and OV24 underscore RAS. And here let me do a plus icon. We need to add a alias. So let me add 24 alias. I just give some random name. You can give any name that you want and save it. So we have added our report as a RAS call. We have added attributes and maps. We have added few attributes. We have added few maps and we have added one launch parameter. And let's see how we can use them. So if you see here in the assembly, in this component, it shows an error, which means there has to be some component outside of this in order for this to transmit the message. So here what we will do, we will try to add one async mediation. So if you hover anywhere on this workspace or this assembly, you will see some of these shortcuts. And one of the shortcut is that we are going to use is create async mediation. Okay. So now what we will be doing, we will be capturing the data from this component in this component. So what we will do, we will try to go here and in the common tab, in the routes to select the drop down and select async mediation. And you see the connection is already established, which means the message passes from this component to this component. So now in this component, what we will do, we will try to create an eval. So what does this eval does? This eval can be used to read the properties or the incoming message from this component, from the upstream component. So let's see how we can use that. In the expressions, I will do a plus and I can create props. Props, let's say, is given a random name, props of launch parameter equal to, in order to read the launch parameter, the syntax that we need to follow is LP, which is the launch parameter dot, and you need assist here, do press control space. Once you press control space, you will get the list of functions that you can use. So here you can use any of this value. Like for example, let me use lp dot get simple data, and here I need to pass the label, which is the label from the launch parameter name, which is this one. So let me pass it here. Now I'm reading the launch parameter into this value. Let's try to read a few other attributes and maps. I will add one more props to read the benefit. So in order to read the integration attribute, the syntax is it get attribute and do control space, and it shows you the syntax. Here we need to pass the actual attribute name from this component. If I go to services, and this is the attribute name, and remember here the type is a text, so you can directly use get attribute. Now this one, this is an instance field, this is not a text. So for here you have to use a different syntax. For example, take another props, say supervisor dot get reference. Okay, so I need this attribute reference data. So I am looking for the attribute reference data because it is a single instance. So I'll copy this, I will paste it here. And what is the reference data type that I am looking for? So this reference data type, it can be a reference ID of the supervisor, or it can be a Workday ID as well. So for this demo, let's try to read the WID of the supervisor. So now I have all these. Now I need to read the integration maps as well. So let me try to add a map value here. So map for gender, just taking one random. This map, no, so that I can get some assistance. Get integration maps. Yep, this is the one. Integration look. Now the map lookup, what I need to give is the gender. So need to give the map lookup the key. Let's say I give this. Now I have read all the attributes and all the maps. Now we have everything here. So what we will try to do, we will try to create a log file and try to capture all these props into a log file. So for log file again, what we will be doing, I'm clearing out the mediation message. I'm adding a text, which means I'm creating the message. So I will copy this props, go here, let's say, and I will click on this symbol. I will paste it. I will say, okay, in the next line, Similarly, we'll try to read the benefit plan and we will try to print it. Next line, same thing for supervisor, the same thing for gender map. We are printing everything here and let's save it. Now you see the error got disappeared. So let's test this part. Now what I will do, we need to deploy this in our environment. So what I will be doing, I will be right clicking on my project and select deploy to Workday. In this window, you will need to select which tenant you want to deploy. Once you select, check these two check boxes. Click on next. Now this will be a confirmation saying that this project will be deployed into my tenant. And it will ask you for a small confirmation. You can read through it and click on in the bottom right corner. You will see the status of the project deployment. Now the project has deployed. Let me go to the tenant and I will search my studio integration. It's not there. So let's see what is my integration name. I'll go to Workday in, I'll go to advanced. This is my integration system name. So it should be there. Yep, there you go. It took some time to reflect, but this is my integration system. So as you can see here, the integration template, it took cloud integration template as a default and it attached the studio project that I just deployed. Okay. And then it added the attribute maps and the report services that we added in our Workday in component here. You see, this is the benefit plan supervisor. In the integration maps, we added gender. In the launch parameter, we added text. So now what we will do, we will try to configure those attributes and maps. So in the attributes, in the benefit plan, I will say 1, 2, 3 because it is a text field. And in the supervisor, I will select some random person, let's say Steve Morgan. Here, if you see, this came as a selectable value because we have configured this as an instance, not as a free text. Now we have configured our attributes. Let me say, now let's configure the maps. This is similar to how we configure the maps in Core Connector. You will be having a default value, let's say y, and when your internal value is m, you can have the m value, and it is female, you can have f default value, you can have as maybe let's say n not declared and you can save. So now we have configured the attributes and maps. Now let's try to launch this integration. And how do we launch it? Similar to other integrations, through related actions, integration, launch and schedule, and run now. So here, this is the launch parameter that we added in our studio integration. So here you can give any test studio, for example, just to make sure and check if this is getting captured. Now let me run it. As you can see, this is again similar to same other integration types. It just runs in the backend. Now let me refresh. It's processing. As you can see, it is completed. Now it doesn't have any output files or messages because we have not added any files or messages yet. So now let's see where did we added our log file. So in the logs, when you retrieve these logs, you will be able to see something called server log. You need to open that server log. Let me open it. And here you will be able to see those values here. So as you can see here, whatever the values that we configured on the integration attributes, maps, and the launch parameter, those values are being captured successfully in Studio, and these prop variables or prop properties, whatever we defined, has read those values so that these values can be used in the downstream mediation. So, which means in this flow, wherever we want to refer the attribute or map, then we can directly refer this property. This is one example of how to configure the attributes and maps and read them inside the integration for downstream processing. Let's take an example of calling the Workday custom repo. This is one common scenario that we will be doing on a more frequent basis with studios to call a custom report that is nothing but a RAS. So for the same component, let's try to add a Workday custom report. To add a Workday custom report, we need to add this component called Workday out REST. So let me drag here and let me connect this to this. So I'll go to common in the routes to I will add Workday out REST. Now the connection established. After that, I need to set the properties of this Workday out REST. So I will click on it, and here there is a mandatory XPath that I need to select. So what I will do, I will select this alias. If you remember, this is the alias that we created originally. So I am going to select that alias and save it. Now, after we configure the Workday out REST, what I want to do, I want to store, or maybe I want to split the data individually and do some processing. So what will I do? After getting the data from this RAS report, I can use something called splitter. Let me see this one. So I'll drag it again. I'll again connect this routes to splitter, and inside this you have different splitters. So this is the most common one that we typically use when we use Workday out REST, which is XML streams. So whatever the data, let's say we are getting 10 records from this report, those 10 records will be split individually and then further processed. So how do you configure this splitter? So for that, first we need to understand what will be the output of this Workday out REST, which is nothing but our RAS report. In order to check that, we need to go to the tenant and try to find out or search our report. Let me search the report. It's not there. Okay. Maybe let's take this one, for example, locations. Okay. So it says there is nothing here. There's nothing. Okay. Let's take this report as an example. Okay. So now, in order to see the data in the UI, you can typically go here and run it. Let me select as some other. It's not coming here. Okay, let me do one thing. Let me create one new report. Okay, I will say RAS. Now, a couple of things that you need to remember when you are creating a report that you plan to use in Studio, then it has to be advanced and it has to be enabled as web service for sure. And data source, let me select active and terminated curve for HCM reporting, and I'll say okay. So I'll just add maybe just an employee ID, different one, I guess. Yeah, maybe let me add these three fields and I will save it. I need to enable the prompts and I don't need all these prompts. So I'll say do not prompt at runtime. Worker types, I can just filter to employee, but I still want to say do not prompt. So I can save it. Now run this report. You'll be able to see this 500 rows of information here. But in order to see how this data comes up here when you run the Studio integration, so for that you will have to go to the related actions, go to web service, save few URLs. Here, if you click on Workday XML, it will ask you to enter the username and password. So let me get the username and password. So I've entered the username and password and I'm signing in. Now, if you see, this is what the report will send in the backend. When you run the report in the UI, it will be in the tabular format. But when you call this report in the backend, this is how it will generate the data based on this format. Like if you have remembered in EIB how we transformed using XSLT, you can do similar transformation if needed in Studio and save the file. So in this case, what we can do here, if you, let's say if you want to split each individual employee and do some processing, then how do you do that? So that is when you use the splitter, and inside the splitter you use XML stream splitter, and here you need to give the XPath. The XPath will be WD report data slash WD report entry. This is because if you see, there are multiple report entries for each report data. That's why you can split based on this. Once you split, you can do further processing. So let's say after splitting, you did some processing, or let's say you did maybe XML to CSV conversion. Let's say if you want to do that, then what you do here, you can add an async mediation. I'll put it here, and you can again, first thing you have to connect this component to this component. So I'm connecting here. Now, since I know what is the data that I'm getting here, this is an XML content. What I will do, I will try to maybe read these values. We'll try to use some delivered components called, let's say, XML to CSV. So I can simply put this component here so that the incoming message, it reads as XML and it can see my conversion is done. If I want to aggregate everything, I will use something called aggregator, and inside aggregator, there are different aggregators. The most commonly used one is the size batch strategy. So again, we have to connect from this component to aggregator. The aggregation, or let me delete this. Let's say we will add message content calculator, and we will also add size batch strategy. So you can actually batch or group the data into batches and then collate it at once. And once you have collated, now let's say you want to store it. So again, you will create an async mediation. I'll put it here. Inside async mediation, you will have the store step. And again, for this async mediation, the connection has to come from the aggregator. Here, route it to here. I can also change this, the direction of this, like something like this, using drag and drop features. So now, after aggregator, it comes to store. Inside the store, you can define here, you want to store it in maybe a test variable, for example, and you can give a title, demo, CSV maybe, okay? So you have given a title, you have given what data it comes, and that's all. After that, let's say you want to add a message to the studio integration saying that it has been completed. Then you will do that using put integration message. So let me see here in error handlers. No, yeah, as you can see here, put integration message. Here, it will ask you what are the details that you need to submit. I'll say, okay, now again, I'll connect from here to put integration message. And in the message, I'll go to parameters and I'll say info because it's just an information. And in the summary, I will just say demo completed, for example. So now I can save it. Now let's deploy this and we will check. Again, check these two check boxes, click next and finish. It's deployed. Now, one thing we have to do is, since we have added this Workday out rest, we will have to go back to our integration and go to the related actions to integration system and select configure integration. Once you do that, here you can configure your report. Is that the one that we just had? This is the one. I'll copy, I'll go here, I paste. Yep, this is the one. And I can save it. And the other important thing that we missed was, if you see in the back end, this is the report, this is the data that we said it will pass to the studio. So one thing to important is this. So this namespace, we have to add it in the namespace prefixes of the studio integration. So if you see right now, it is this one, but it has to be this. So let's go ahead and edit this one. So prefix will be WD, and the rest of the data we can copy from here and paste it and say okay. Now save it. Now we have to redeploy again. Now we are good. So let me launch the integration system. So name, just give name and say okay. Okay. Let me refresh. It's got completed. Now you see in the messages tab, whatever the message that we printed, it got captured here. And at the same time, whatever the file that we stored here under the store component test underscore demo.csv got captured here. So this is how you can generate a file using a custom studio integration, lot of complex logics that you can place in between the mediation components. So this is one simple route flow, but ideally you can have multiple logics and multiple flows that you can define here and test your integrations. For that, you need to be aware of all these palettes, all these components, what each component does, and you can get the idea of each of these components using the help section that you have over here. So this is all about Studio. Similarly, in Studio, like this is one example of an outbound studio. We can also build an inbound studio that will actually read the file and process the data in the file in a similar way. Okay, so now we have covered about almost all the integration tools. Now I would like to discuss a couple of minutes on the security. So ideally, when you run the integration, for example, here if you see, by default it shows initiated by your ID. It also shows it ran as your ID. So when you are scheduling, let's say this integration on a daily basis, so this integration runs in production on a daily basis. So, and if you have scheduled it, it runs with your ID. So suppose in future, after scheduling the integration, let's say this person, Jack Clark, has left the company, then this integration will no longer run because the user is no longer a valid user. So for that purpose, we will create something called integration system user. So integration system user will have an integration system security group. So for that security group, usually we will assign all the security that is needed to complete the integration successfully. So usually this will be done by the security team sometimes, or sometimes by the development team itself. So you can create an integration system user and you can assign an integration security group to it and assign that user to this integration system and the schedule so that whenever this integration runs in the batch mode on a daily basis, it runs with that system user. Now, since that system user will be there in Workday all the time, we will not face any such issues of the integration failures. So that is just a quick overview of about the concept of the integration system user and the integration system security group. And the same concept applies for all types of integrations. The same security we can apply for EIBs, we can apply for studios, we can apply for core connectors as well. So this completes the studio part and the training as well for the advanced module.